All right. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. So this is my talk, anonymously submitting transgressive transsexual trauma to IFComp. Hi. Hi. So why I'm here, who I am, my name is Stanley. I make narrative games, and I've made a lot of them by this point, doing this for several years now. And last year, I was undergoing a project which is quite close to my heart, and is something that I'm quite intimately familiar with. And this game is Latex, Leather, Lipstick, Love, Lust. And for the sake of not taking up all the oxygen in the room, I'm just going to be calling it by one of its subtitles, Sextuple L. You can play it online. You can play it after this talk, so I want you paying attention. And it's a semi-autobiographical story, and it's specifically, very, very specifically for chronically online British trans men in about their mid-20s who were on Tumblr too much in their teen years. And it's really, really great because I can just like say words that are related to this that either will mean absolutely nothing and you'll stare at me very blankly, or will make you squirm in your seat, like words such as bi-lesbian discourse, crypto turfs, kink at pride, he, him butches, sissy hypnosis, words. The brief plot synopsis: we are following the titular L, and he's a freshly graduated trans man who's now going into a world that hates him. He's chronically online, no real life outside of Discord and Tumblr, and then he goes to a kink club thinking it will fix him, and it doesn't. The rest of the game is him following this hyperfixation on this man he meets at this club, who he thinks is basically the best person to ever exist, while also trying to navigate life in the UK and his very toxic online life, which is effectively his only social outlet. And this is a very specific story, but it's telling an experience that in the broad strokes, especially the online stuff, is actually an experience that myself and many other people around my age have been through. Departing from that a little bit, let's talk about the other half of this, which is IFComp. Now, I did have a note here that says that obviously IFComp needs no introduction at this conference, not realizing there was literally an introduction to IFComp talk yesterday, which is really cool. But I first submitted a game to IFComp in 2022, and it was not this game. It's a very different one. And this was a period when I was just starting out as a dev. I was just getting into narrative games, and I was desperately trying to look for anything that would make me more employable. And then I found this workshop with the Work with Indies Discord. And it was a junior writers workshop, and I looked at it and thought, oh, this looks pretty cool. I might get something good out of this. I applied, I was accepted, and we were going to make a game in Texture Writer, which is a specific IF engine. It's based around like dragging words around and then dropping them onto other words. It's a fun thing to play with. I recommend it, but I just like messing with any tool, so I recommend anything. And the game I made was this, Nosebleed. This was a very on-the-nose metaphor for being autistic, and the nosebleed being autism, in effect. And excuse me. And then we were told what is going to happen is that the final result of this workshop will be all of us submitting our games to IFComp. So I thought, oh, that's pretty cool. Like, it sounds like some kind of jam or something. I've done jams before. That sounds pretty fine. And then they said, like, yeah, it's going to be really, really good opportunity for you all putting your stuff into IFComp. Like, so many people can look at your stuff, and you're going to get thousands of eyes on your work. And I thought, oh, that's not right. Like, I've been in jams before, and like, they gave you more traction on your games, surely, but not absolutely nothing to that extent. Like, that is an exaggeration, and it absolutely was not. So I went into this effectively blind, and I had no idea what I signed up for until 2 days after the voting started. Whoops, that was not supposed to happen. There you go. But considering that I went into this entirely blind, I think I did pretty well. I scored pretty well. Some people liked it, some people didn't, but some people thought that what I made was pretty important, and I agree with them. However, this whole experience taught me something very, very important, not just to Google what you're actually submitting to, but the difference in culture based on where I'd originally been from and something like IFComp. I started off with Itch, and I'm still here. I post all my games here, love the site. And there's a specific, could you stop doing that? I love technology. And there's a specific culture around Itch, and it's mostly around people wanting to boost and support other developers. And if someone likes your game, they'll opt in to leave a comment, they'll leave a rating, they'll leave a review. And if they don't like the game and earnestly like the game, not just because it has men with vaginas, if they don't, they'll often just skip it and they're not really going to spend any time in it. Most people on itch, they have too many games in their backlog to waste time on games that they don't like and then waste even more time telling the devs about it. Compare this to IFComp, which is almost the exact opposite. The culture around IFComp, there are veterans of the competition who make an effort to try to play every single game that is released in the competition. And then there's a further culture around writing lengthy reviews about the games that you play, even if you did or didn't like them. And that's very, very different from what I was used to. And going back to Nosebleed, and this is a game that I'd effectively made for myself, right? I wasn't following the IFComp meta or trying to make like a comedy parser game or whatever. I was just doing whatever and just seeing what happened because I didn't know what I was doing. And I'm going to, there we go. The thing is, something's happened here. And to prove this point, I'm just going to make this comically large. The ratings are what happened. It's very diverse. It's very spread out. Because what happened is that in text, I had people in reviews saying how much the game resonated with them, how much they enjoyed it, how much they found the game touching. And then you got people who would then come in and said, this game doesn't make any sense. This game is pointless. I don't know why you've made this. Like, what's the point? Based on standard distribution, this was the third most controversial entry. But for all those people who kept saying, like, this is pointless, what are you doing? Why is this here? I'd made them feel something. It hadn't just like entered their heads and then immediately rolled out. No, it had stuck. And I really liked that. And it made me realize as a dev what I actually want to do. I wanted to create these hyper-focused, targeted experiences that were deeply devastating for a very select group of people, but were basically inaccessible to anyone else, right? Because the people who love them, and the people who hated them proved the point of the people who loved it. So I'm now writing Sextuple. This is completely independent of IFComp. This is an idea I've had for a while and something I wanted to make. And then I realize IFComp is around the corner. It's in a few months. So then I thought this. And then I thought, why not? Doesn't break the rules. It's fiction. It's interactive. It's not like it's the first time there's something transgender that's been in here. Let's do it. So I signed up, filled out the intent, everything was on track, and then I decided to do something very specific. I was going to submit the game anonymously. Now, on hearing that, you might assume that this is out of some kind of fear. I don't want people to know that I made this game. I don't want them coming after me. I'm nervous about the reception. And the reality is that I just thought that it would be funny. That's mostly it. I actually submit this under a digital art collective that I'm part of, Lethal Breakers. And it's this group where we come together, we make anonymous game jams. So we'll all make a game. Nobody knows who's made what. And then after the fact, we have the choice to claim it publicly. We then have, oh, that's the same thing. And there's a lot to be said about how this, like, and groups similar to this, like Domino Club, about how there's like a great place that you can go into this and you can make games that you never necessarily would before. There's no like preconceived notions of you and an artist, and genuinely, I just thought that this would be funny, and that is my main motivation for doing this, because I wanted to see people shit talk. We'll get a bit more into this later, but some people in the IF community knew me. They knew my games, they knew what kind of stuff that I did. But if I submit this anonymously, so it's entirely divorced from my name, it gave them full permission to just rip into it. Because I'm not here, there's no face. So they can just say whatever they want. The reaction will be completely genuine. Right. Fast forwarding, it's now IFComp. It's now, was it September last year? It was September last year. It's September, the game's alive, and everyone's free to play them. And now please keep in mind that I'm expecting this to be absolutely panned outside of its target audience. Just like keep in mind of that like very specific target audience of like British trans man born 1997, 2002-ish. Chronically Online was on Tumblr, probably still is on Tumblr right now, had no friends growing up, most of their social development over the internet. It's a very specific group. It's more than you would expect, but it's a specific group. And again, I expected no one outside that to relate to this at all. And somehow, they did. But at first, this reaction was mostly from other queer people. And then I sat down and thought, okay, that makes sense, right? the likelihood is they probably hit like one of those categories, even if it's not all of them. So at least I could reconcile. I thought like that made sense. I get it. And then more reviews started to come in from people who were decidedly absolutely none of those categories. And they were saying how this was a trans story that they'd never seen before. They were so like interested in it. They were really invested in the writing, the presentation, and there's no like real point to this. It's just me being absolutely flabbergasted how this happened. And I still don't really understand how or why. So thanks. I don't know why, but thanks. But then shortly after, the most important group saw it, and this is basically my target audience, quote unquote. And just getting this response and getting it so immediately basically just confirmed that this was a game I needed to make. It was something I had to bring out into the world. And deep down, I always knew this while I was making it. I was very self-assured in making this game, but actually getting that response, it was very nice. It was very nice. And there's pretty much like nothing else that I can say that these reviews don't say, so I'll just leave you to read this for a brief moment. On that break, so I drink some water. And now, yay, the people who hated it. And now, as I pretty much got like the first like standard wave, as you'd expect, you get people doing what you're doing is pointless. Why would anyone play this? Kill yourself, slurs, usual, yada, yada, yada. And then often, which I found really interesting, people would couch this in critical language. Because what they do, they try to make themselves sound respectable. Because they're not going to say that they don't feel empathy for anyone who doesn't act and talk exactly like they do. They're just going to ask, why didn't they do this? Why doesn't the character act exactly like I do? Why doesn't this person with crippling social anxiety just go outside? Why don't they do everything correctly? And it's very interesting because that was a similar reaction that I got from Nosebleed, which was a game about neurotypical people not listening to autistic people. But there was another very interesting reaction I got from a group entirely detached from this. And I was in several Discords. Again, people have basically no idea that I've submitted something. I've told like a handful of like 3 people who are some close friends. I made an account as my pseudonym on the forum so I could see like all the secret author forums as well. And there was this subset of queer people whose reactions I found very interesting because they'd start off really, really enjoying the game. They really clicked with L. They loved his anxieties and they loved like how they could connect with him. And then as the game progressed, they started to find themselves drifting a little bit. One of the biggest points of contention in this game, and that was pretty much in every single review, is that L is fatphobic. And he's a bad person. He's the subject of many bad environments, and obviously that doesn't absolve his individual actions. It's pretty much a subtextual thread of this game that is very much a point. And the reason he's a fatphobe was a series of very, very deliberate choices. And for any trans men in the room, any trans men on Discord, I will just say the Rasaku Guide to Being a Very Hot Guy. And if that gives you no reaction, it's a guide that is very famous. And it's for trans men, teaching trans men how to dress themselves, to make them look more masculine and to make them pass. And one of the key parts of this guide is that it tells you that if you want to be a man, you have to lose a lot of weight. I don't know why I didn't include it. There's a point here that just says, by the way, if you're getting to the point where your periods stop, maybe you should stop losing weight. That's the kind of level we're on. And this is just one small part. I won't subject you to the whole thing. But if you speak to any trans man like under the age of 30 who has been online in any sort of capacity, the fact that the likelihood of them knowing this guide, or more often not following this guide, is extremely high. And there's pretty much no other resources for trans men from a transmasculine perspective on how to dress and on body image. And the big one we do have tells you to starve yourself. Really good for body image. And so it's this kind of endemic thing within transmasculine communities, especially white transmasculine communities, of this idea that you have to be skinny, or at the least thinking that skinny trans men are this sort of idealized body type, right? L is naturally skinny. That's just how his metabolism, that's just how his genetics roll. And he not only benefits from this bastion of community knowledge telling him that being skinny means that you're a man, he benefits from societal fat phobia. That's where this guide sprung from. So he's not going to say anything. And this is a conversation, it's starting to get louder online. Anyone who's in any activism circles online, fat phobia and why that's basically just toxic to pretty much everyone on the planet. That's becoming louder. But L benefits from this, and he doesn't want that paradigm shift. So he knows it's bad, so he's just going to stand back and he's not going to say anything. One of the big things is that the antagonist of the story is fat. And as the conflict between the antagonist and L escalates, what happens is that L starts to fixate almost entirely on the fact that they're fat, not on the emotional abuse, the gaslighting, the internalized transphobia. All of that gets pushed to the side just because they're fat. Because L benefits from this. He doesn't want to confront this because this is what he thinks is the only thing that makes him a man in the eyes of society. He's terrified of losing it. Hence, him being so scared of confronting it and basically admitting that this is a terrible thing. Whoops, that's got it. I hate when the notes go back up when it goes to the wrong thing. Now, so all of that, this is context that if you're a trans man, you immediately know this. Pretty much all I needed was one line saying that I'm going to check the Risaku guide before I go get a haircut. It would tell you pretty much everything. But to people outside that community, you pretty much had no context. This effectively comes out, almost blindsides you, the fact that L is fatphobic. But the interesting thing from this reaction, from this specific set of queer people, is that because they were so invested in L at the start, their anxieties, the social stigma, just trying to get a haircut, not having a breakdown over it. And suddenly this came out. And suddenly they went, well, I'm not fatphobic. So are you implying that I'm fatphobic because I'm not fatphobic? This is absolutely incorrect. And actually, no, it's terrible that you put this in a game. You shouldn't have put this in a game. You are a terrible queer. The reason it's here is that if I didn't include it, I'd be pretending that this massive black stain on the transmasculine community doesn't exist. I had to include it. This is a critical part of L's character and how he relates to being a man. So to skip over that would be just cutting that out of our experience. And I refuse to do that because someone had to tell us. And then for the people who reacted so viscerally to this, it was that thing of not wanting to be a bad queer. And the idea that if they related to someone so heavily before, maybe they're closer to being a bad queer than they expected. So even after I was proud of what I made, I really liked it. I like the reaction. There's still the question of like, why bother? Like, why bother submitting his IFComp, going through all of this, going through all the stress of having all these people say all these things, and why? I could have just posted it to Itch. It would have found its audience and it would have lived there pretty much happily for the rest of its days. Like maybe one of those people would have found it in the future. Maybe they make a comment on it, but it would have mostly just stayed in this happy little bubble of everyone enjoying it, right? Here's the thing with being trans. This is a more urgent point than it was just a year ago. Literally anything you do means that someone wants you dead. You can just the fact that you exist, you're just living your life means that you live rent free in people's heads. Like, and there's a point where you just like have to laugh at like how absurd that is. You can just be sitting in your apartment, like you are making these people absolutely seethe over your existence while you sit in your apartment drinking some juice. Like that is just absurd to the point of just black comedy. And simply exist to tell a transgender story is to be in direct opposition to this. And trying to sand that story down or get rid of the sharp edges or make it palatable, it doesn't work. Because the only palatable trans person is a dead one. So you have to tell them in spite. You have to shove them in places where they shouldn't be, because being trans means that you shouldn't be anywhere. You're an anomaly. And being in any minority really means that you're someone to be corrected, you're something to be assimilated. You're not something to be celebrated. So, and then what good is it to remove what makes you from the stories you want to tell? What good is it to satisfy people who are apparently trying to help you? Basically reduce something very personal to you down to just nothing. I put Sextuple L into IFComp deliberately to be provocative. And he didn't initially do it as some kind of political point. Like, as you probably gained from this talk, I'm someone who likes being a little shit. I like making people angry. But by doing anything, I become a political issue for being trans. And because I have to be a political issue, I'm going to be the most self-indulgent and loudest political issue that I can. In particular, narratives around trans men often find themselves languishing. They find themselves biting themselves back. They find themselves reserved. And there's a pincer of setbacks here. There's this fear of being trans in a society that punishes any sort of trans identity. But there's also this fear of contributing to patriarchy, of being a man, and that finding joy in being a man means that you're contributing to this. And if you find any joy of that, it means that you're betraying like this acute awareness that you understand that power structure and that you don't want to contribute to it. So with Sex-L, I said, fuck it. I'm going to make something that's for us, that's for our experience. I don't really care what anyone else thinks of it. Here's all the wonderful and the terrible parts of our community, and I don't care if you think that it's unrealistic or absurd or just plain stupid. I'm just here to present it with a bit of purple prose. As many people predicted, Sex-L went on to win the Banana of Discord, which is the award given to the most controversial entry, so the highest standard deviation. It did pretty well in another sense. 11th place is quite nice, and that voting spread is absolutely gorgeous. I love it so much. And it even went a little further than that. Just last month, it won the New Media Writing Prize. But that's not the point. It's nice to say that it placed well, and it's nice to say that it's award-winning, but it's still the same game before and after that. The reason I made it is still the same. And to drive home why I needed to make this game and why we all need to make games that are unapologetic, making art that's unapologetic, I shouldn't be here. And I mean that quite literally in that I physically should not be here in Philadelphia. If the entire subject of this game, my beautiful accent, and this presentation has included you into it, I'm British. I'm a British resident, I'm a British citizen, and I had to cross a border to get here. A border that is actively detaining, disposing, and disappearing trans people. I made it through. So why? And reason for that is that the trans man is invisible. A single letter M on my passport, a couple years of testosterone, and I am suddenly invisible to a world that wants me dead. My point, my modus operandi of this entire talk, this game is proven by the point that I am stood physically in Philadelphia right now, and nobody at the TSA line blinked an eye at me. And people don't like trans men talking about this. Any complaints are seen as you stepping on the toes of people that have it worse than you, and because you're a man, you see. And you can't really complain about being a man because that's a privilege, right? And you're paradoxically seen as both a threat to the existence of men and to the existence of women. Because my existence as a man means that I suddenly encroach on this idea that men are this bastion of a caste that just, you can't be a man unless you're born into this group, right? It's protected, like nobody else can be that. But then I'm a threat to women because suddenly I'm turning my back on this disenfranchised group and now joining the enemy. Instead, the trans man becomes a wedge issue. He becomes the gotcha. Because, well, if you force trans women into men's toilets, suddenly trans men now have to be in women's toilets. No, you're going to have beards in the women's toilets, which is an absolutely ridiculous proposition to the millions of women with facial hair. Like, it's the gotcha. It's the wedge in the logic, right? And it's wedge in the logic that doesn't exist. There is no way to correctly be trans. Being trans means you're something to eliminate. You're something to marginalize out of existence. You'll never be good enough to be truly a man, and then you'll fail in your existence as a woman. So, but the thing is, as a trans man specifically, you have the advantage under the system. Because all you have to do is you put your head down, take testosterone, and then you retreat into silence. Because isn't that enough to just be invisible? To assume that you're part of the others while they go after the rest of them, right? And that is why that game exists. Because I want to shove that advantage down their throats and make them choke. If you try to be more palatable, give an inch, they'll take a mile. I firmly rooted myself on that mile, and I refuse to move. And I think everyone else should as well. My name is Stanley Baxton. I refuse to die until I am certain that that will be on my tombstone. Thank you.
We got 5 minutes for questions. If you ask a question, you get a point there.
You were talking earlier about how in Successful L, your protagonist became very controversial for being fatphobic. And that just reminds me of something that I always see in circles around interactive fiction, all kinds of stories, TV, whenever people start focusing more on relating to the protagonist than actually just seeing what the author is trying to say with the work of fiction. Do you ever find that frustrating? Do you think you'll encounter that again when you create another work of IF?
Right. So for the Discord, so that was how Al was considered a controversial character, how characters, people usually relate to characters as something to relate to rather than just looking at the author's intent.
Especially being protagonists.
Especially being protagonists. The answer, yes, I absolutely expect that now in the future and basically forever. Like you say, that's endemic to almost like any kind of media. But IF specifically, I think there's cliques who are like very into IF being this very, very narrow thing to define. And it's kind of like I think it's like the residuals of the IF is only passes and anything else is like, it's not interactive fiction at all. And it's kind of something that, like I say, with basically my whole point here, you just have to create in spite of it because you will never, ever satisfy that. So you just make exactly what you want and you will find the people who need to see it.
There's a question from the chat. How did you get started in writing and interactive fiction? Did you ever used to make more palatable games and stories, and that's how you learned the lesson to be so unapologetic?
Nice. So I trying to think because my first games it was less that they were what's the word? It's less that they were palatable, more that they were kind of just like, yes, more like slice of life. They kind of like dabbled into like more like serious things, but they never really like fully dived into it. I actually remember what was the main catalyst was being inspired by people from Domino Club. They make a lot of these games that they're intended to just be like basically just for like the authors, and then they have quite a decent following because they're just like fully to themselves and they love the games that they do. A very, very specific inspiration for this, because I often read books, read media, whatever, and then I'll be inspired like, oh, hey, I could do something similar to this. And it was a book, Penance by Eliza Clark. And if any of you haven't read Penance by Eliza Clark and you were on Tumblr in the 2010s, for the love of God, read that book. And I read it and I just thought, wow, I can get so much worse. And then I did.
Yeah, I mean, I really like your perspective on sort of kind of aiming to be controversial, like going for that spread. My question is, I guess, when it comes to feedback, do you sort of have more perspective on that, something that they kind of view as like separate and like something you don't really want to let affect your work? Or do you take like either positive or negative feedback into consideration for like your next thing? What's sort of your specific like outlook on that?
Right. So the Discord, so that's if I listen to any feedback at all, if I listen to positive or negative stuff. So there was actually kind of an interesting thing where on the first draft of this, which I submitted to IFComp, there were like I was having some like some thorniness around the that phobia subline because I was like, actually, I don't think there's enough like. There was one bit that was like 50-50 on including, like, do I need to? Does this make it too obvious? Then some of the feedback was like, oh, I don't think this lands. And I was like, yeah, okay, so that should go back in. But generally what I find is that one of the things with feedback, especially with writing, and I definitely would assume this applies to a lot of other art as well, is that I'd say half of trying to pass feedback is do they get what you're going for? And if they do they understand like your angle of it? And oftentimes I found that only about like generally like 60% of feedback you get is people who genuinely understand I understand what you're going for. His feedback I think can make it stronger. And you either go, well, no, that kind of goes into conflict with something else I want to do, or you go, actually, yeah, I agree, that makes it stronger. Some of the comments I got were from people who got it and were like, yeah, I don't think this fully lands. And I was like, yeah, so I'll add that paragraph back in. But then some people, like I mentioned, were just like, I don't get it, and I'm just going to be very mad and angry about it. So you just like, you laugh and move on for those kind of people. Sure.
So you submitted this anonymously. At what point did you take ownership of it? Because clearly you're here giving a talk about it.
Right. So Discord, when I took ownership of this game, I took ownership during the award ceremony, right at the end of IFComp, because I was then invited into like this little Zoom where we're like, hey, you made it into the top 20. And I was like, oh shit, I did not expect that to happen. And then I basically, when it was announced that I got 11th place, I was just like, yeah, I just submit this because the deadline was near. Thanks, bye, which was